one thing, that yes, it's a multinational company, but it was not always a multinational company. And I think it's important to recognize, at least that's how I see it from where I see the world of work and trade union organization, that it's not really just about multinational companies. My sense of, in fact, employment relations in India is that they're conditioned by Indian employers. It's Indian employers that set the bar. They set the bar very low. And they open a field for foreign companies to come and operate at that very low bar, so to speak. And what I learned from the experience of just looking at managers, dealing with managers, negotiating with managers, you can have expatriates in every part of corporate operations. Of course, as the chief executive, head of technology, head of finance, head of sales, you never have an expatriate in dealing with industrial relations. It's always an Indian who's dealing with industrial relations. So there's nothing like a global policy. There's an Indian policy for dealing with industrial relations. It's something that's tested by Indian managers. It's tested by Indian capital. And it's something that global capital figures that this is a good way to do it. They do it better than we could possibly do it in their country. It's their country after all. That's how they look at it. So yes, there's a tinge of racism also thrown into it. So Suzuki really took a call in the year 2000 that they wanted two things, or rather they wanted one thing. Maruti Suzuki started life as a public sector company with a minority shareholding of Suzuki Corporation. It started as a public sector company with an overwhelming public sector equity ownership. It was really a company that changed not just the Indian roads, but it also brought in for the first time really Toyotaism in terms of sort of production methods. And in the late 1990s, when the BJP came to government and flagged off sort of very open privatization policy, Suzuki found that they had the political space in which they could push for the privatization of Suzuki and complete control over the company. What Suzuki discovered in their search for a privatized Maruti was that the union was its biggest obstructor in achieving privatization. And I think their call was that they wanted to go ahead without a union. They wanted a privatized Maruti, but they didn't want a union. So that was the second call they were taking. And what they did, which was unheard of in India, was they succeeded in persuading the government of Haryana, which is the state in which they operate. Labor law, unless it involves direct employment relations with the central government, the appropriate government, or the operated government, as it were, is always the state government. Suzuki unilaterally managed to get the government of Haryana to unilaterally withdraw the registration of the union of the workers of Suzuki. Privatization ensued. There was victimization, which has still not been settled by the courts, and Suzuki carried on. Through the decade that followed, India, as you know, had 10, 12, 9% growth, whatever it was. Markets did grow fast, the middle class grew faster, and the demand for cars grew even faster, as a result of which Suzuki grew even more. They set up a second plant in 2006, and they of course believed that after all, if we can run our mother plant without a union, they would continue to run their new high-tech, mostly robo-run plant without a union too. Somewhere, of course, things began to sour. The plant went into production in 2006. They hired workers as trainees, but as those workers started, robos can't do everything, unfortunately or fortunately. A global scale car plant that produces 500,000 cars would still need about 10,000 workers. And in fact, if you were a complete car plant, which actually also developed technology as they exist in Japan and Western Europe, similar sized car plants would actually not employ less, but would employ more workers. A comparable plant to Suzuki in Western Europe, to the plant that we're going to talk about, the one in Manesar, would actually employ between 20 and 25,000 workers if it was in Western Europe or Japan, if it was an integrated car plant and technology site, while what we have in this part of the world is really car plants churning out cars like banana chips. So it has only half the employment. At any rate, As workers began to be regularized, they had a strong sense of revulsion for their conditions of employment. Their conditions of employment, apart from the wage was a problem, but I think if you sit down and talk with the workers, what the real problems were, actually they did not have, forget about the time, they didn't have the right to peak. And I think that's a sense that I think we need to take when one talks about, I think there's a fourth thing that I forgot when I flagged. I said our constitutions are, overarching in 3 or 4 aspects of dealing with questions of labor. They all are very unequivocal about protecting citizens against bondage and forced labor. Any society whose constitution does that would assume that every human being needs to let off, so to speak. But there were a few other things that went with the problem at Suzuki, which not just included time to go to the toilet, but also complete destruction at various levels of the wage on a sustained basis, which is deducting wages for absenteeism. By absenteeism in this case, it really meant only time off, taking a day off, where wages were deducted as much as 1/4 of the productivity benefit. So workers who were meant to have a paycheck of 8,000 or 9,000 rupees for 1 day off could end up with as much as 2,000 rupees less. So I think it's these conditions which resulted in June 2011 in the creation of a union, which then led to 3 episodes through the length of 2011 in which there were work stoppages and industrial action. What that industrial action was marked essentially by was the refusal of the government of Haryana to register the union under the Trade Unions Act 1926 that Karamat referred to. Second, the signal of the employer very clearly stating that they were not willing to entertain a union at any cost. Most of all, they were not willing to entertain a union that had office bearers from the outside. The first union application had indicated that they the union may wish to be associated or affiliated with a national trade union center, in this case the All India Trade Union Congress. And lastly, the employer or the company raised very clear questions of how production was to be regulated on the shop floor, which obviously workers wanted to say in terms of getting a breather. In the interregnum, workers were also persuaded, in inverted commas, really coerced, which they resisted, to sign on to become members of a yellow union, of a union that the company had propped up after it got rid of its union in Ghualm at the mother factory. So that was a second attempt, which did not succeed. The company also had put in place a mechanism where the company was deducting union dues for its union, or the sort of company union or official union or whatever one wants to call it. You'll find references to it. It's called the Maruti Udyog Kamgar Union. You'll find references to it in the documents, which also sort of became a sticking point. The 3 instances of industrial action all resulted in agreements between management and union, with the government of Haryana acting as a go-between, or certainly a witness within the tripartite conciliation proceedings, which is really how labor law, which is the core of labor law in India and continues to be the core of labor law adjudication in much of the subcontinent. Sometime in early 2012, some 7 or 8 months after the first of the skirmishes, Maruti Suzuki did find a compromise in which they permitted a union to be formed. the government of Haryana was given the green signal to register that union. It was a union with only internal office bearers. There had been an agreement for bloodletting, so to speak, in the run-up to the formation of this union. At the end of the last of the 3 episodes, in which where the entire sort of union leadership withdrew from the company, so to speak, resigned their employment and took redundancy payouts. So you know, this is something that went through sort of a series of sort of constellations in finally getting to the point where a union came to be formed. And from the time that the union came to be formed, there was sort of something like 2 short months in which the union presented a charter of demands, and then there was an episode of what's now known as 18th of July. We actually now have, at least amongst us, something that refers to something by a date other than a terror attack in the subcontinent. What was the episode of 18th of July 2012? And without going into the details of that episode, it would be reasonable to say that some kind of riot took place in the process of negotiating a dispute. And in that sort of melee, one manager was killed. Post-mortem evidence suggests that the manager died of asphyxiation as opposed to throttling, which would indicate culpable homicide. There is no evidence yet from post-mortem reports that there was sort of any murder or attempt to murder in his case. And in the 24 to 36 hours that ensued, 147, or initially about 130, and then in the days that followed, a few more workers were arrested. We are exactly 13 months from that day, and and every one of these 147 are still in jail. Various bail applications have been moved on their behalf, and those bail applications, and all of those bail applications have been released, have been rejected. I'm actually going to read from the Punjab and Haryana High Court bail judgment. It says, and I quote, this is the judge's opinion, yeah, after he's been through the arguments both by the defense and by the union's lawyers. It stated that that property of more than 500 crores of rupees of the company has been damaged in the occurrence. And then it goes on to say the incident is most unfortunate occurrence, please excuse the English, it's not mine, which has lowered the reputation of India in the estimation of the world. Foreign investors are not likely to invest money in India out of the fear of labor unrest. So this is where so we're talking about the death of a individual with 147 people jailed. There's a fairly clear set of criteria which is there in this judgment. I'm sorry I didn't bring copies of it. I can leave this, the copy I have with the organizers. The judgment itself sets out very clearly the conditions that the Supreme Court of India has set up